So next we'll move to Mike Wehrs, who is CEO of Scanby, and Mike will make his presentation in a few moments.
Good afternoon, everybody. Oddly, this feels very strange to be back. How are you, Yari? Oh, the stories of Yari and Mike. So anyway, thank you all for asking me to come back. I was really just thrilled to get the invitation to come and speak today. It let me go back and review some notes of things that had happened back then, and pull out some photographs when there was a lot less gray hair, a lot less weight, and things like that. So in any event, what I thought I'd do is just cover a few things that were my thoughts as one of the guys who signed the original agreement that founded the OMA. So it was quite an adventure as we did it. So to put this in a little bit of context, I was the Microsoft guy that nobody wanted to have in the room back then. Yeah, right. So long as I was in earshot, that's what I heard. But we learned of this idea to stop these micro forum proliferation things that were absolutely killing us from a how do we deploy against it perspective. And we heard there was an opportunity if we engaged very quickly to help a consolidation force where we could actually put enough manpower against it when Microsoft viewed it as the most abhorrent thing in the world to try and have a standards organization at all. So it was like, well, we could have one in mobile and actually maybe deploy against it and do something useful. So we got behind it in a big way, and the company asked me to take on that lead role. So we were faced with this pre-OMA world with all of these microfora proliferation and everybody having, the technology of the week that was the thing that they had to figure out how they were going to self-perpetuate based on so they could keep traveling. And then I looked at it and said, well, wow, after about a year or so, what had we got done? And this is the official answer. So the early days, we hammered these things out, and the number of people who have participated in doing this is incredible. And I'm not going to talk in detail about each of these specs, but Web Services 1.0, it was the first time that we could actually deploy internet content on a phone in a standardized way, and we didn't have to customize it for every single phone on every single operator's network. This was an enormous time saver, and it catalyzed an entire revolution in content delivery. So we loved this particular spec. Download capabilities, again, eliminating the whole problem of all of the different handset types that were out there as a restriction in how we could get content to the device, be they applications, which were just a warm spot in people's eyes at the time, or whether it was music or pictures at that particular moment. That's what everybody was interested in. DRM, the amounts of wars that went on DRM, my goodness. I think I still have a few scars on this one when we came in the room and talked about a particular investment that Microsoft made in a company that had something to do with this space, and that was a very fun time also. But it ended up being somewhat of a failed experiment, as we all know, right? The consumer spoke. So I'll echo one of Philippe's comments. They said, you know what? We buy content once for 100 years plus. You've trained us that if I buy that content, I can plug it into another 8-track player and it'll still work. And we tried to break that, and we didn't listen to what the consumers wanted, and they spoke, right? So even though, yes, we made it possible to deliver content, and yes, the spec was adopted, and yeah, we fought over it, everybody did, but in the end, the consumer said, that's really interesting, great technical work, don't care, not going to buy it. So now we're at a point where it's like, okay, we understand, we have to deal with the realities of what the consumer wants as well. But at the time, it was a fantastic accomplishment. The transcoding interfaces, the keyboard generator, the multimedia services, Philippe's favorite, so I won't steal any of the thunder from him, but he was the guy behind it who pushed it at every meeting he could. But yeah, I remember the discussions on this one where it was, let me see if I got this right. We're going to try and take a picture of something and send it to some other device. Don't we call that an email attachment? And then the entire rest of the room would be like, what are you, nuts? That's called doing people a favor. That's not called a business. And we get into arguments about, well, we needed a new spec to do that, and it couldn't be compatible, and we'd never open up gateways and all of that, and round and round and round and round. And now what do we have? Everything is interoperable in general, and MMS has taken on an interesting role in the value chain, which I absolutely did not perceive at the time, which was if you have an 8-megapixel camera and you shoot 8 or 9 pictures in a row, you kill your battery in your phone if you let the darn thing upload. So we use MMS so that we can actually keep our phone running for the day and still send pictures. It's an interesting double-edged view of how come it still has a lot of value even 10 years later. So what are some of the unofficial ones? These are the ones that I thought would be a little bit more fun to talk about. So these are my takeaways. There's a relative size here to these. And yes, so this was, Sun was working the standards world for 8 years or 9 years before Microsoft even could spell mobile, right? All the specs were just so Java-centric. It was almost bytecode required on the data transmissions at the time. Nokia was so dominant, it was just, we will never have an open machine. It's going to be a vertically integrated handset platform forever, and I will go to death wars if anybody ever tries to change that model. And it was just hilarious stuff. But at the time, they were so dominant, and Microsoft had nothing, right? We came in and we said we took a Windows CE kernel on a set of hardware that only the richest people in the world could afford to buy on networks that couldn't support it yet, and it was flaky and not interoperable with anything, and we thought we knew better. Right, great. So you can imagine how well we were received by this one. But in an interesting way, Sun, IBM, and Microsoft actually had something in common. And that was kind of the key insight for me. It was we monetized our business the same way. We thought about the world in terms of endpoints where processing took place, and therefore we were selling services and platforms around those types of things. And you looked at where Nokia and the other handset manufacturers were, and they had a similar way to think about it, but their value model was different. But it allowed for a nature of conversation about where standards needed to develop that didn't necessarily destroy one of the ecosystem partners' points of differentiation and business value. And the last part of this that I saw is the third tier that was really a big insight to me was we put this other third group in the room with us, and we said, let's all have a party. And it was crazy, right? The operators. These are the guys who were giving everything away for free. Handsets. You don't give away handsets. I mean, you charge people for PCs and hardware. There's cost in that. The stuff that goes over the air, that's free. What are you talking about? That's just a network. We don't even think about that. It's just better work. So you can imagine the clash of business models and fundamental thinking that went into the different constituencies here. And that's why, in my mind, this is kind of my key takeaway slide. It's we taught 3 different industries that had the fiercest competition within each one, that actually if they could figure out how to not only build necessarily a competitive differentiation within their industry segment, but between the industry segments, if they cooperated in the right way, they could actually catalyze an enormously valuable market overall. And that is what really did it for me. What do we love today? That came out of the standards work that a lot of things happened here. Well, this is your classic boot up screen on an iPhone. I thought it would be fun. So I had some of the engineers go through and say, even though Apple may not have followed everything that OMA thought it ought to do, it did do a lot of things and leveraged a lot of the work. So if you took out every OMA spec from an iPhone, what would you be left with? That's what you'd be left with. So even though, we look at it, and to Philippe's point, he's right. There's a lot of things they didn't follow. There's an awful lot that they leveraged. Okay, so the work that we did here is still incredibly important because they wouldn't have what they have today if it weren't for that. So yeah, I think it's better to look at this from what else could we have done to help the adoption in a bigger way, to help it be more than just pieces. But the overall work, the impact that we had, you can take an awful lot of credit for what the iPhone did and for where it is going and the revolution that it has introduced in terms of multimedia capable devices. So this has been mentioned a couple times, and yeah, it's not Brooklyn that we went to back then, but we didn't go to the worst places in the world. Part of the recruiting posters for this one were join the MMA and travel the world. I'm not sure if that still holds anymore, but it was the only time in my career where I was successfully able to, with a straight face, walk into a vice president at the time and say, can you just approve this business trip? I got to go away for a week, and we're going to add some time on the other ends for prep meetings. And he's like, why are you asking me? You can always go whenever you got to go. I said, this one you need to approve. And it was because we were going to the Big Island in Hawaii, right? And it was... And he even bought the excuse that, well, we have a lot of Asian members and we have a lot of US members, so therefore it's equal travel distance in the middle. And I don't understand how he must have had a bad night before or something else completely distracting him to accept the argument, but we got to go. We also sent a lot of people. We had 8, 9 people going, which for Microsoft, I think, set a worldwide high for participation in standards meetings. We almost didn't know what to do with ourselves. There were so many of us at some of the meetings. But some of the people here, you see some shots of the pool in the Big Island, AJ Cave when we were in Paris overlooking the Eiffel Tower. You'll see some shots of that. Isabelle Vallée Harper, always smiling. For those of you who don't recognize him, at one of the ruins in Rome, that's Miller, or at least part of Miller. Trevi Fountain, and we actually got to watch a acrobatic circus show one night at one of the places we went to. I think it was in Berlin. I didn't have that picture categorized, so if I got the location wrong, sorry. A couple other things we did, certainly some more Hawaii shots. We took some people, went swimming with the dolphins at another trip. That was another great one. We did another one where we had some people who went out scuba diving for a night dive at the end of the work day. So yeah, there was a lot of work, and it was fundamentally cool work, but it also set some things to allow people to bond at a level that they never would have if we didn't do those social things. The highlight for me and the moment that I'm most proud of from a number of angles, some of them I can't believe I got away with it angles, and others that really did have a transformative effect on everybody at the OMA at the times, were the Rome trip, where I raised my hand and I said, we'll take on and do a sponsorship trip. And I challenged my marketing team to do something completely off the charts. And we actually rented the Sistine Chapel out. We brought everybody to the Sistine Chapel and let them file in about 20 at a time, lay down on the floor in the after hours, and just take in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And that led to a level of acceptance, a level of camaraderie, and a better willingness to work together that I don't think we would have gotten anywhere near that fast if we didn't demonstrate that, we understand that people are people too. We needed to learn how to work together and understand it at that level. So it was a really big event. We were proud to do it. And I was really very thankful to the team who helped me pull that off. So what are some of the lessons learned? Well, to summarize it a bit, the direct competitors can work productively together to improve an ecosystem. Sorry about the typo. The ecosystem competitors can actually work productively together to create an enormous marketplace. And those words I chose really carefully. All right, it really shows that you can get 3 different fundamentally diverse sets of industries together and have them work in a cooperative fashion to catalyze an industry that's worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So it's a very significant effort that has resulted in substantial economic value gain for the world. Focusing on the end consumer's problems that need to be solved. This is something that I've been harping on since my earliest days, and certainly I brought it into OMA with me. We've got to keep in mind what the customer is trying to do. We can solve all kinds of technical problems that are really interesting, but if they're not a problem that an end user has, it's really hard to convince them that they have a problem when they haven't run into it yet, and that they ought to pay for that solution on top of it. Okay? We can try, but it's really hard to do. Think broadly. It's outside your own company's perspective to find the most suitable and supportable path forward for a standard. In other words, oftentimes I'd walk into the room, and rightly so, everybody would say, oh, this is the Microsoft guy again. He's going to talk about some protocol as opposed to an API, and I could care less why the difference. And it was very myopically thought of as to what am I trying to do to connect back into the Microsoft infrastructure. One of the things I learned was, wait a minute, if you take your blinders off of that and talk about what are the other assets that might be out there that I can connect into, and what are those industries doing, it let me think much more broadly. And I'd challenge everybody that it's really, really easy to get indoctrinated into your own company's thinking, and not about what are the other assets that this membership provides for you, that if you can figure out how to tap into it, it's dramatically more valuable. And the OMA success is the industry's success, and that is also the customer's benefit. So if we do it right, we're serving our customers and we're all making a bunch of money while we're at it. And we're not commoditizing an industry and trying to drive the price to zero for everybody, all right? Because that doesn't let any of us travel anymore, and that doesn't let us do any of the good work that we're doing. What are some of the tenets, though, when I was thinking about preparing this talk that I came to mind about what is it that we did right that let us accomplish all of these things, that let a lot of you guys take it from my early days up to what you've been able to do with it over the last half a decade. It was an extremely well thought out, thorough, and strong foundation. The IP was fought hard. We had lawyers on top of lawyers going through figuring out exactly how to craft an IP policy that's going to stand the test of time. And the one time we actually had to make a change to it, I think it took 10 years off my life, but we got it through. But I don't know if it's had a change since then, but my goodness, did it stand the test of time, and it allowed people to collaborate in a fashion where they didn't have to have a lawyer present every time they opened their mouth. So it was really an important thing to do right. The process. The key tenet here was if it's going to be a consolidating industry standards organization, that you're going to have to be able to have other people come up with great ideas and say, the processes at the OMA are so good and the overhead is so low that I want to do my work there. Right? And that kept it lean, mean, and focused on how to get things done quickly. And that was a really important thing that I think gave OMA the staying power that it has. Vision, the bylaws, it's a relentless adherence to those principles. No one ever compromised on that. It was always, is this within the scope of what we should be working on? If not, we have to consider what it means. And with that, you can do some incredibly powerful things. And I think that we did. Timely execution. Although it's really hard to believe I'm putting the word timely in anything that has to do with presenting to a standards organization. In this particular case, some standards take a dramatically longer period of time than OMA does. So it has set a pretty good bar for how quickly things can get done. But by no means, if we went and had a conversation with any of our product bosses, would we be talking about timeframes like this. So the challenge is still out there on how to be even more efficient and more timely. But at the end of the day, some things that are going to be broadly adopted, as much as OMA standards have been, they are going to take some time to get them right. And the last one is that member companies, by your own commercial interests, have elected to ship a lot of OMA-compliant products or otherwise products that use pieces of what OMA has come out with. Without that commercial tie-in to actual real product, everything we do here would look awful pretty on a website somewhere to download, but it wouldn't be shipping any product. So it had to be good work, good enough to be commercially realizable and good enough to sell to our top management teams. And we did those things. Everybody in this room did these things. Next, Seth asked me to talk about what did I think of some of the things that OMA ought to be thinking about. So this is Mike's crystal ball, if you will, of, boy, I think these things are on the horizon, and if we're not thinking about them, there's going to be a missed opportunity because someone's going to race to market and just say, I got a solution for it, and then we're going to end up with fragmentation again. So to start with, the overall tenet here is how do you achieve the right balance between enablement of innovations, in other words, the customer hasn't thought about it yet, but we have, versus solving a current customer's needs, right? Clearly understanding which of those camps you're in has a lot to do with how you solve the questions that I'm going to propose here. So there is an impending personal information access crisis. And what I mean by this is, yeah, it used to be a little bit annoying when we installed an application. It said, you know, here's the list of 97 things that I'm going to give access to. And then that didn't work because, you know, the regulators got involved and everybody said, well, wait a minute, no, I want it to pop up every single time someone wants to use location. Can I use it? Well, imagine when someone has 40 and 50 apps on their phone that aren't only accessing location, but now we're asking for, I want to log into the site. Now I'm looking for not only the location, but I'm looking for your browsing history, and every single one of them results in a pop-up that I have to make a decision about. We're going to end up with an overload situation for customers that they simply will not tolerate it. If we don't have an elegant solution, the regulated solution is not working and it does not scale. So there is a certain opportunity here for us to figure out how do we want to access the hardware and the services that are in the phone, that are stored on the phone or stored elsewhere in the network, and make sure that there are standardized ways that that can be marked as a class of services can have access to it, or individual ones can do it, but how do you represent that to an end user? And I think that there's a real big opportunity for someone who wants to step up with a leadership role to figure out how do we want to handle this whole personal information access. We've done a particularly good job of making human beings into radio routers. I don't think that this is something that ought to be our goal anymore. In effect, I have one page of my 5 on my Android phone that's dedicated to managing the radios on my phone. Turn 4G on and off, look for another 4G network, turn 3G data off, turn it off internationally, turn it on domestically, turn off Bluetooth, turn on GPS, all of this stuff, and I get to spend my day playing every time I move in and out. Well, Wi-Fi goes off because I'll get another 15 minutes of battery life out of this thing. And change device. I change devices every 6 months. I'm still that way. But this is something that I think we have to figure out. I mean, it's absolutely insane. I take this back to like one of the first true mobile phones where I didn't have to plug it into my car all the time. And, you know, I thought it was great when I was getting 4 hours of battery life on that thing. Well, I'm back to that again. It's just 12 years later on. We've done something wrong. So we have to figure out how to intelligently do this. And I think that there's a great opportunity at the hardware levels and at the software levels to figure this one out. And the next one, for those of you old enough in the room to remember it, phones are really becoming tricorders. If you think about the number of sensors that are in a phone right now, and I'm broadening this to be more than just radios, right? I'm looking at cameras, I'm looking at NFC, I'm looking at Wi-Fi, mobile networks, I'm looking at POS things, I'm looking at apps, vibration sensors, G-force sensors, orientation sensors, all of these things. If you will, when I take this phone out of my pocket, it is sensing the world around it. What exactly does that mean to me as an end user, and how could I standardize that as people start to think about more interesting things that they can do with those sensors? Right? If we can figure out some key enablers associated with access to and combining the information from all those sensors, we will catalyze an entire industry that knows how to take advantage of that. But if we give them that raw access to all of those things and it's different on every platform, it's not going to work. It won't take off. So a big opportunity to figure this one out as well. Next, I thought I'd have a little bit of fun. Yell it out if you know the significance of some of these numbers. So 300. Sponsors? Spartans, yes, good. One of my favorite movies. But no, in this case, it's the average number of OMA member companies since it was formed. Okay. Another number, 150. It's the number of technical specifications published by OMA in the last 10 years. Okay. 40%. It's the number of founding companies that are still active members of the OMA. That's a staggeringly high number, right? So we've lost some, and they're not the most active members anymore. But yes, the founding group that started it out, 40% are still very active members. 50 plus. Didn't have an exact number. The average age of the person? Good guess, but no. No, 50 is the number of plenaries that have been done in the last 10 years. So there have been 50 of these large sessions that have been put on. 13,000 plus. No, it's the number of attendees that you've had in the last 50 plenaries. So we have 13,000 people who have participated in the plenaries of the OMA. Think about that from a T&E perspective, from a time out of office perspective. Think about the value add and contribution from all of the members in putting in that many man days to go to different events. It is a staggeringly large investment that the industries that represent and make up OMA have put into getting it where it is today. 60%. I just got to cheat for a second here, sorry. This is the percent of all devices out there, so all electronic devices that have any communication capability whatsoever that in some way use an OMA spec. Okay, that's a staggeringly high number of devices, right? 90%. 90% of all carrier infrastructure that they sell has some element of OMA specification that is in it. Okay. And the last number that you should all be unbelievably proud of, 99%. And this is the at the core level for mobile devices. This is iPhone, Android devices, and so forth. Of all of the devices out there, ship some element of OMA specifications in them. So 99% of the smartphones out there have some element of OMA specification in it to start with, which is a staggering accomplishment. Everybody should be incredibly proud of that. Right? Think about the impact that that has had on this world. Okay. And with that, I'll thank you all for your attention. I look forward to joining you later.